mic on. I'm Jonathan Foster on 1B. I was reading in here, it says, due to the lack of sufficient signage, they're unable to make complaints. And so what the board is, they want to adopt and enforce reasonable rules and regulations. And it does say in the next paragraph to adopt attached board rules governing auto parks. But when they voted the chief in, the mayor was lying to me about the chief. They said they were picking a chief. You guys want to follow some rules here, but when they were picking the chief, they were lying to me. But you're saying here you want to adopt some rules and have some reasonable rules and regulations. You have when they voted the Madam President, hi Madam President, words of engagement. They didn't have a quorum. Just to have all 5 people here, but they only had 4. So it's illegal. Here you're wanting to adopt reasonable rules and regulations. Where were the reasonable regulations and rules that you were supposed to follow when they were picking the Madam President? And where were the reasonable rules when they were picking the chief of police? This is a major city. This is human beings. You're just being lied to.
Madam Vice President, he's off topic.
I'm not off topic.
Yes,
Here you want to have
Foster,
reasonable rules, but you guys don't follow rules. What's your name? T. Fink. You don't follow the rules.
Madam President, the speaker is off topic. This is about board rules
you want to
for
have
parking
rules
lots.
followed, but you don't follow the rules. It's called double-minded. Your brain's screwed up, sir. It's old age for you, but it was the same way when you were 14.
Mr. Foster, your time's almost up and you're still off topic.
You want to follow rules, but you're not following the rules.
Thank you, Mr. Foster. All right, that concludes public comments. Have a motion? All in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? Carries. Item C, does any commissioner need to hear a report from the department on this item?
No.
Yes. Someone from the department here to speak on this item? Yes.
To the rescue.
Good morning, my name is Captain Billy Brockway. I'm the commanding officer, was at South Bureau Homicide. I'm currently at Southwest Division.
Okay.
I'm stepping in for Stacy Spell.
Okay, thank you. Couple of questions. This is really more about just the underlying asset here that we're dealing with. This says that the donation is going to offset the cost of this equipment in the field. Is this the total cost, or do you have any sense as to how much the total cost is?
Yes, we have an estimate $33,000 to outfit the South Bureau Homicide.
So it's roughly half or about half, and the other is just out of existing department resources?
Correct, sir, through Motor Transport Division.
And what is the, this is also going to support the abundance of cases investigated in the field. Roughly, give me some sense of how many that is.
Sure, I'll give you a quick rundown of South Bureau Homicide.
Yeah, no, I mean, like roughly how many of these investigations occur in the field where this vehicle will be used?
Oh, last year, every single one, 82. Year before that, 102. Year before that, 114.
Okay, excellent. Oh, and what's the current, without this donation, what's the current situation? Are you making do with some antiquated equipment, or what's the status quo?
Yes, sir. We work out of the back seats of our cars. So each investigator has a duffel bag. He carries his equipment with him. When we get to that scene, and we go back to our cars, get that information, or our tools to measure and gather evidence, and everything from DNA to fingerprints. We work our own stuff.
And this is this equipment then is going to, for lack of a better term, solve that.
Oh yeah, absolutely.
Is it consistent then with other PO0s?
No, we'll be the first. We'll be the first to do it. RHD has a response wagon or van, but we'll be the first homicide unit to have this.
Excellent. Okay, thank you.
Thank you.
I would
Thank you, sir.
move approval.
Any public comment on this item?
Yes, we have one, Jonathan Foster.
Sorry.
Mr.
sorry.
Foster?
Thank you.
Thanks.
My apologies.
It's all right. When you're always looking for a budget issue, the money went to Israel. The money went out of the Pentagon that you're looking for, and you have to rely on other people to give you money, which is really nice. I mean, I agree, it's a nice thing. $17,000, it's not easy to come up with, and I couldn't come up with it, but I know where the money went, where you guys are struggling constantly. It's all I hear from the LAPD is we're having to meet budget issues. And so you've got to talk to some really nice people that have a lot of money, and then you get a donation for things that you need, which is great, except it was supposed to be coming out of the taxpayer. And we have so much money. You could have so many cars just sitting around you can't even use because we have so much money. And the truth is, we have so much money. The place makes enormous amounts of money. You should not have to ask another rich person for any handouts at all. It's appalling that the Congress does this to all of you who signed up to put your life on the line, and then all of a sudden you don't have all the resources when we know that we really could have every resource you need. And then, hopefully, you would have never, ever had to shoot anybody. And the dark cloud that seems to come over this organization around the entire United States wouldn't be quite as dark, possibly. Thanks.
Thank you, Mr. Foster. Do I hear a motion to approve?
So moved.
All in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Motion carries. Item A, Departments, Los Angeles County Department of Mental Health and D. Hirsch Mental Health Services, verbal presentations and discussion on the status of the 911 Suicide Prevention Project and alternative response to mental illness calls for service. Good morning. Thank you for being here.
Good morning, Commissioners, Chief Frank, and thank you so much for having us today. I am Lieutenant Brian Bixler. I'm the officer in charge of the Crisis Response Support Section of Detective Support and Vice Division. And with me here today is Chuck Lennon from the Los Angeles County Department of Mental Health. He's a program head for law enforcement programs countywide, and also Sondri Kramer, who is the projects and grant manager for D.D. Hirsch Mental Health Services. So this project we're looking at was originally came out of a conversation that Sondri and I were having about 4 years ago on alternatives to having police officers respond when people are simply suicidal and no threat to public safety at that point. We came up with the thought that because D.D. Hirsch Mental Health Services runs one of the largest suicide prevention hotlines anywhere, we asked how many of those calls, when people call into that suicide hotline, actually end up in a police response. And her answer was less than 1%. So we thought if that's the case, then if people are just calling the wrong number, how can we change that paradigm? So we wrote a federal grant together. That grant was denied by the federal government. And so since then, we have been trying to work on a way to fund it from other sources. And along with the Department of Mental Health, we've come to an agreement, or they've come to an agreement to have the Department of Mental Health fund 2 positions on a pilot. Now, these calls would be, our last 2018 count, we had over 6,000 calls that would fit the criteria that would allow these calls to be diverted away from a police response. And it is believed and hoped that we could divert at least half of those calls away from police response. And I think that's a conservative number. So the status of funding has been our biggest hiccup or roadblock in this endeavor. And we believe that has now been smoothed over, and as Sondri has told me that even if things are not smooth with DMH, but we believe they are, that there are other funding sources that are willing to help us fund at least the pilot, which would be 2 positions, 7 days a week, and on the hotline. And I'll tell you kind of how that hotline would function, and then I'll have Sondri discuss kind of what her role in that would be. The idea would be if somebody called 911, either a third party or a person who is suicidal, and basically fit certain criteria, we would start with protocol for police response. If the person is a suicidal subject who is threatening to jump off a bridge or other structure, if they need emergent medical attention, if the subject has a weapon and is outside in a public place, or if the suicidal subject has a weapon inside a building or residence and other people are present, or there is a public threat running into traffic or something like that, that would have a police response. Any suicidal call other than that, we would do a warm handoff to D.D. Hirsch Suicide Hotline, where there'd be dedicated lines and dedicated counselors to handle those calls. And once that call is identified by our 911 call takers. Yes,
Could
ma'am.
you just repeat the criteria again for calls that would not be diverted?
Sure. And again, this is a draft, so we're working through this with everyone, but a subject is threatening to jump from a bridge or other structure. The subject is in need of emergent medical attention. The subject has a weapon and is outside in a public place. The subject has a weapon inside a building or residence and other people are present. The suicidal subject is in public and is threatening to run into traffic or poses an other public safety risk.
Thank you.
So once we identify those calls and have that call patched in as a warm handoff to Dee Dee Hirsch, then I will have Sondri kind of cover what they would do with that call once it comes in. Sondri.
Thank you. We would handle it like all our other calls on the suicide hotline. We are indeed one of the busiest centers in the network for the National Suicide Prevention Lifeline. These calls would come to a dedicated line, so it would always have priority no matter what. So they will be answered within seconds. All our staff and volunteers are supervised by shift supervisors who will be monitoring the call. If we are unable to further de-escalate the situation, or if we determine either with or without the caller that intervention is necessary, it will be the shift supervisor who connects back to 911 dispatch. We'll have an incident number, we'll have all the information to let them know that we still need rescue. But as Lieutenant Bixler just mentioned, that is really rare that happens with us, and we know that a lot of the times those types of calls, if they were to end up in an emergency response, it can be very detrimental for the person at risk and can ward off future help-seeking behavior. So this is a way to serve our community better. There's a big movement in the country to really look at more non-coercive interventions for people in suicidal, emotional, psychiatric crisis. And that is how we would handle it. And then we have very specific protocol in place for de-escalation. Again, we would also have a direct line back into 911 dispatch to ensure that we can have an immediate answer as well.
So that is, again, one program we talked about, which I said would have about 6,000 calls a year we've identified that would fit this program. There are other calls, however, that are not suicidality calls. They are lower acuity mental health calls, the calls that we really have no other response for. When a call comes into 911, there are lack of resources. It's always going to be a police officer. So one of the things that the Department of Mental Health in the last year or so has come up with is therapeutic transport vans. They've purchased 8 of them. And they are being used in various capacities throughout the city. I spoke to Dr. Jonathan Sharon, who's the head of DMH, and I said, we'd love to be able to dispatch those from our call center. He laughed at me and said, those are county resources, not city resources. I spoke with our grant section last week and proposed the idea that if we were to buy them through a grant or other funding mechanism for the city of Los Angeles themselves, we would then have control of them and then find some funding to staff the DMH positions. And I can have Chuck Lennon talk about what the configuration in these vans is, because it's not police officers. This is actually, the idea is like the Eugene model of CAHOOTS, which is police funded. It is dispatched from police dispatch. However, they're not police employees. They're funded through the police department, but they're not police employees. They are, in their case, they have a social worker and a nurse that responds in a van to cases that may not reach the level of police response. So with the DMH coming on board with these therapeutic transport vans, the idea is that we could try to find funding. Again, this is in its infancy stage and it's just an idea, that we would have 2 vans that would be staffed and be able to be dispatched by our 911 operators. Maybe start in a small couple RDs in Skid Row or another area where we have high need, and that van would then go out with an LVN, a licensed vocational nurse, and other DMH employees, including a peer counselor that would be able to engage with that person at a different level than a police response would necessitate. I don't know if you wanted to cover anything else on this. Oh, I got it? Okay, thank you. So those are some of the ideas, again, that are on the table. The 911 suicide diversion is moving forward. Our next steps are going to be to confirm the funding, but Sondri has already said that basically the funding is moving forward, so we're already there. We need to draft and sign a memorandum of agreement between the LAPD, Dee Dee Hirsch, and LA County Department of Mental Health for services to be given. We're going to have to cross-train. We have some folks from our communications division here, and they would probably be carrying the bulk of this because it's to be their operators that need to be trained on what calls, how it's going to work. Working on a decision tree, working on the policy, but like I said, most of it's done. It just now needs to be moved forward and approved by the city attorney and obviously by the chief and those parties involved. We probably have to we'd like to look at Portland Police Bureau because they're the only entity in the United States right now doing this actively. They divert about 200 calls a month, and that's a small, Portland's not big, but they divert 200 calls a month away from police response with this program. So we'd like to see how that works in real time, and then implementation. And Sandri has told me that from the time now to implementation, since the funding is going to be there, is going to be 4 months. So that's what we're looking at this time. And if there's nothing else from my partners, open it up for questions.
Thank you. This is diverting mental health calls, both for suicide prevention and other mental health calls, away from a police response to a more appropriate social service response. Is a huge step in the right direction. So I appreciate all the work that's gone into this. Excuse me. A couple questions. On the suicide calls, you say that can be implemented within 4 months. Could we have a report back in 4 months on hopefully successful implementation? And then we can, maybe at that time you could propose a schedule for coming back to just assess how the program is going and how close you're getting to diverting at least half and what the obstacles are to diverting the others, et cetera. Regarding the second diversion approach for lower acuity mental health calls, has the Department of Mental Health agreed to provide the resources that you described and that you're just waiting for the van to get the resources of the vans, or has the Department of Mental Health not approved those resources yet? Hello.
Excuse me. Good morning. Thanks for inviting us here. The therapeutic transports, the 8 that have already been purchased, they're working on staffing those. What Brian was talking about was a secondary sort of like plan, so that hasn't gotten off the drawing board yet in terms of staffing.
What did the other ones cost? There were 7. What did they cost a piece?
I think with because they had to be, you bought the van, then you had to
Sure.
trick it out.
I understand.
Wrong. And I think it was about 75,000. I might be a little bit under, but it's around there.
Just for the van?
Yes.
And then what about the personnel?
They're going to be 3 personnel. One's a peer, a mental health clinician, and then a driver. So the driver is just strictly driving the van type of thing.
And what's the DMH cost for those 3 personnel?
I'm sorry I didn't get that before I came. But usually using a standard, it's probably, I'd say for each staff person with retirement and pensions, probably $140,000 per person. So that would be, that's $420 per van times 8.
We only have one, or you're suggesting
You're
2
talking
vans?
about 2, right?
That was the
Proposal.
idea, and when I spoke with grant section, we spoke about several different funding streams that could possibly do this, and again, this was just an idea of moving forward in that direction. Our original idea was because we have the psychiatric mobile response teams that the county has, that as they grew, because the Department of Mental Health is going kind of through a growth phase and they're trying to expand that area, is that we might be able to use those in this type of response. They're just not at that level yet of being able to have our dispatch operators reach out and we can route the call to Access, which is DMH's 24-hour hotline, but there's not always going to be a response. It may be they need to make an appointment for the next day. So we'd really like you said, to have this be real time. And so if we could, again, just the idea of if we could buy these, and they would be now city assets with county resources to be able to dispatch those on our own, that would be the idea. And again, that is contingent upon, as you said, the funding is not small. But I think there are grant opportunities and other funding mechanisms that we might look into.
And when I say county, I'm also, when we were talking, I think we should look at our directly operated partners like D.D. Hirsch and maybe partner up with them, especially if it's going to be a project, let's say in Skid Row area. What are some of the partners there that might want to work with us and
What
be in the van.
additional, what incremental services, what will the communities served by these vans, what will they feel different?
Well, it would be a transport that's not on a police car,
Uh-huh.
that's not going to be a fire department rescue ambulance. Primarily, those two means of transportation would be avoided if possible, if the person meets the criteria to be in the van. So you wouldn't take somebody medically compromised, agitated, 415, so to speak. They wouldn't go. But if somebody, like a patient I had yesterday, oh no, I just want to go to the hospital, I need help, and was totally cooperative, that type of person we would take in the van.
And so would the police respond at all in those cases, or only?
Ideally, no. It
Good.
would be, if we could get to the point, like Cahoots does, that it's triaged at Communications Division and meets the criteria to say this is going to be a therapeutic transport response only, then that would be the hope. And then if they did get it seen and something happened, they needed response, we could provide response. But ideally, the police would not be involved at all, and you'd have, like I said, a department of mental health, either a nurse and a peer, somebody who's suffering from mental illness themselves and works for the Department of Mental Health to be with that person and to provide a more therapeutic mode of care and transportation at that point.
And how many calls do you think could be diverted with these two vans?
I'm not sure. As I look, the numbers are so big, and a lot of times, especially in Skid Row, the calls aren't being made. There are a lot of calls, but they're the more high acuity calls, so these would be the ones where they get lower priority, they're non-coded. But I have not done a deep dive into how many we could. I know that in Eugene, they handle about 2 a day. And
It would be
that's-
good to know how many are eligible and then how many
Yeah,
could be
and-
served by, two vans plus.
And like you said, the program with the DMH is they're still figuring out protocols for themselves. And so we'd have to work with them to figure out what that might be, but I can definitely look into that.
Okay. And do you have an estimate of the cost savings to the department for if they divert both the suicide calls and these calls?
That's a large number, but our initial assessment was well over $3 million for suicide calls only, and that was based on 2015 numbers, and we haven't updated those numbers. The numbers have stayed fairly consistent over the past 3 years as far as suicidality calls. The average police response to a suicidal call with 2 officers is between 3.5 to 4 hours. And so extrapolating that out, that was well over upward of $3 million. Now, if we added in the lower acuity calls, which do take time as well, your savings well over $5 million and up. But I don't have that exactly.
That's good news. Could we use the savings to pay for the cost of the personnel for the vans and the vans?
That is something probably well above my pay grade to answer as far as taking resources from one response and giving it to another, but I'm sure the department can look into that.
Yeah. I would like to get a response to how we would do that potentially. Should I ask for the chief to report back since he's not here? Or what's the best way to find out how we can make that happen?
Madam President, what I would recommend is that you would ask the department at the conclusion of the presentation to report back with a report as to the cost savings that would be generated for the department on both the response models, the 911 diversion and the therapeutic van, and separate those out into 2 categories so you could have an idea, and then potential funding sources to fund the therapeutic van program.
Okay, thank you. Questions from other commissioners or comments?
Yeah, I'm kind of going to go back to the beginning, basically, since it's a verbal report, and so I'm going by my notes and trying to make sure I have the context. First question, you're with the county?
Yes, sir.
Right, and you're a nonprofit organization, and do you have people who do the same thing, just one in the public and one nonprofit, or are your services and functions complementary?
Sure. D.D. Hirsch is county contracted in mental health system, and they're the only ones that are providing
Got
the
it.
suicide hotline
Okay,
for the
great.
county.
Understand that. And then you indicated that I think that there was something less than 1% of these calls that typically require a police response. Is the 6,000, there was also a reference to 6,000 calls that can be diverted, but what's the universe of calls that you get, say, on an annual basis?
In 2019, we had a total of 130,000 calls and chats.
So of the 130,000 or so communications, About 6,000 of those we think can be diverted.
No, we would be adding on to that number.
So those numbers, the 6,000 is calls that come into our 911 call
911,
center.
yeah.
Her numbers are the calls that come into the suicide hotline, which is 2.
Well, okay, I appreciate that. I think what I'm saying, let you fast forward a little bit. If we'll move forward as you're suggesting, because if I understand you're saying that of that 6,000, that they could be diverted to her, so that would be, if they were, you'd then be roughly 136 or...
Yes, right,
okay.
yeah.
And then with regard to the 6 criteria that you mentioned in the triaging, am I understanding that you're saying even when there's cases where someone's got a weapon or someone's in traffic, you're saying even those are situations that you would envision diverting?
So if there's somebody with a weapon inside their own home, they have a knife and they're threatening to harm themselves, we actually, consistent with our protocol of disengagement, that person, if they're not threatening anyone else, they're not committing a crime, we have a process in place through disengagement that the incident commander may decide to disengage from that. So in these cases, if somebody's in their own home with a knife to their wrist and they are expressing suicidality, the process would be to divert that to a suicide hotline, because then, like I said, the laws are that if we then now move in and kick the door and go in, now we are in basically a face-off with somebody with an edged weapon. So this project would be, that person would now be put with a suicide counselor who could and does often talk people like that down and get them the resources and provide follow-up care without engaging a police response in that.
So,
In public, that's different.
Okay, so that's understood. So flip it over the other way. Are there a couple of criteria that you can mention where there clearly would require police officer response?
So these 5 criteria are those. So when somebody is in public with a weapon, that's police response. If they're threatening to jump from a structure out in public, that's a police response. If they are threatening other people inside it, like their family's there, that's a police response. If there is, and again, we talked about somebody running in and out of traffic, that's public safety. So anything with the public safety, and again, we would probably have to flesh these out even more in working with communications division, but these are the ones that would be, we're sending a black and white. So when communications division gets that call in, this would be part of the decision tree of, no, if it fits one of these criteria, we're sending a black and white.
Understood. Okay, right. So that's what I confused. I thought you were identifying those as cases that would be diverted, but very helpful.
Those are calls on response.
And are there situations where do all these calls, every of the 130,000 communications, I would assume that all of those don't come through 911, right?
No, correct. Most of them come through the National Suicide Prevention Lifeline, which is likely to switch over to a 3-digit number, pardon me, as the FCC has just recommended for that to happen. Likely it's going to be 988, but that is still hopefully a little while away, because it will take us some time for the infrastructure to be able to adapt to that. But this actually gives us an opportunity, if we're piloting this, to have even closer relationships with the 911 communications division, which we already have, by the way. I actually am the lead trainer for the suicide calls for training the new trainees for 911 dispatchers.
So my question for you is, do you ever receive communications that come through the national hotline that where it involves a situation where you make a referral to the police department?
Yes, there are times that we actually do that, yeah. And we do actually, I misspoke, we do sometimes get calls transferred to us from 911. Typically, those are CHP 911 calls, yeah. So not usually from LAPD 911.
And two final questions then. One, in terms of the situations where officers are the appropriate response, are those officers on patrol, or is there, what is the training or qualifications of an officer that may be dispatched to one of these situations where there's a potential suicide involved?
This would go back to the normal sequential order of dispatch through communications. So even though they have all the facts, it would go to the first available unit in that division. So all of our officers are now going through the 40 hours of mental health intervention training when they're at month 11 of their field training. So it would be like our normal dispatch, and it would go back to our normal protocol, whereas if there's mental health involved, they're required to contact our triage desk, and then would maybe require a smart team response. So it would go back to just back in the queue like a normal call. So no special unit would be dispatched at that point. It would be the first available patrol unit.
Understood. And then the two positions that were relevant to the potential grant, I understand this to be separate from the those who may be operating the vans. Is that
Yes.
is
The
correct?
van's a whole,
Okay,
definitely
let's put
different.
that aside for a minute. So coming back to those two other individuals, what are their training and qualifications?
I actually need to clarify that in our original proposal, we had it fleshed out as being 2 people, 2 specific positions, but now we're looking more at adding on to our infrastructure to make sure that we have the capacity to handle those additional calls. And so it'd be handled by any of our dedicated staff on the crisis line, and they go through at least 100 hours worth of training. Some of them are volunteer because we're a volunteer-based program, but likely the majority of the folks dedicated to the 911 call are some of our staff, and must have a minimum of 1 to 2 years of experience on the crisis
My
line.
understanding, you just say that with the clarification that it's not necessarily 2 individuals that you're asking
Correct.
for, but it's is it a workload equivalent of?
Yeah, that's what
2
we,
individuals?
yes,
what-
that's
okay.
exactly how we're thinking of it,
Okay,
yeah.
appreciate it. Thank you.
Any other questions? Alrighty, so let's take public comment on this item, and then we can make our follow-up motions.
We have 5 public comment cards: Jonathan Foster, Yvonne Michelle, and Gina Viola.
Thank you, Mr. Foster.
Hi, I'm Jonathan Foster. This is really, really beautiful. It's really, really beautiful that you're doing this. It's, again, taking too long. I could go into reasons. I personally believe that, though, you should have a backup at every call, especially if it's dealing with suicide, because things could turn into an ambush, or turning the events could make it violent. I know very well because I deal with this on a second-by-second basis, so I've been able to survive getting through these issues. If they don't get to the phone, then we can't help them. And I think you're very well aware of that. That's the biggest problem is when somebody's in a crisis, how do you get the phone number over to them? They're already isolated. They probably don't know. They could be physically compromised for this, but that somebody is really, taking this much effort. It just goes back to, I just think about what happened with 9/11 and an Iraq war and all this stuff that could have been, this could have been 20 years ago, 25, 30 years ago. Thanks.
Thank you, Mr. Foster. Ms. Michelle?
Yes, I think you need to have greater sensitivity, especially regarding Black people that call, people of color who have been murdered after calling and being misdiagnosed or labeled or categorized or boxed as, or labeled as mentally ill. I know that these are sacrifices because many of these people, like Margaret Mitchell, like Devin Jackson, even that white man that was beaten by police who was mentally ill, beaten to death or shot to death. There's a Cuban man, I don't know his name, but in working with LA CAN, we've heard of a number of individuals who had been misdiagnosed or diagnosed as mentally ill and then murdered by the police. I've been misdiagnosed as mentally ill, bipolar, manic depressive, schizophrenic, psychotic, paranoid, and delusional. Okay, and being labeled mentally ill, if we have an issue and we have to call, God forbid, we should ever have to call the police, the SIRs and the facial recognition and the predictive policing is automatically on file for the police to view. Okay, I have been subjugated to being assaulted and then arrested by police because of this false misdiagnosis. Okay, and this is used to justify to continue abusing those of us who are either highly intelligent, you're experimenting on us, you have CIA torture chambers, CIA sex scandals, sex slaves, scapegoating people, and extermination and sacrificing these individuals. Okay, the psych meds, notwithstanding the industry, the money that is generated for people that are misdiagnosed, starting from when they're infants, then again, these people are misdiagnosed when we have to call. Our complaints are disregarded because of that false misdiagnosis. And the chemicals or the medication causes the imbalance for which many of us have been misdiagnosed as having.
Thank
So
you,
these
Ms.
are
Michelle.
scapegoats and sacrifices for many of the devil worshippers, not just white supremacist
Michelle, your time is
misogynists
up.
who work for the PD, CIA, and FBI.
Thank you. Ms. Aviola?
So it took 4 years to make this plan. I just want to point that out. It is imperative that we have a different response to mental health calls that does not include, involve, or funded by the LAPD. Grishario Mack was executed in a crowded mall by 2 different officers found out of policy. Albert Ramon Dorsey was executed naked in a fitness center by officers found out of policy. An off-duty officer in Corona shot and killed a mentally ill man in a public Costco, and then shot both of his parents in an attempt to leave no witnesses. This is how the LAPD handles mental health calls. Your predictive policing is part of what has made communities suicidal. It's a big part of what's made communities suicidal. You've been terrorizing Black, brown, and houseless communities for years. My fear is that Dee Hirsch partnering with the LAPD will ostracize it from the very communities it means to serve, much as you've done with PATH, with LASA, with other organizations that are out working with the public and communities in need. The minute they partner with the LAPD, the community no longer wants anything to do with them. There should not be funded positions at your organization by the LAPD. The county has ample funds for this. Just look at the $3.5 billion sitting there for jail expansion. You can take some of that from the county and use it at Dee Hirsch. You need to sever ties with the LAPD or you will have no hope at helping anyone in this community. Police funded means the community cannot trust it, 100%.
Pastor Q, John Marie, and Andre George.
Good morning. My name is Pastor Q from the Church Without Walls, Skid Row, also with Clergy and Laity United for Economic Justice. I'm still appalled that it took 4 years to come up with this response, as someone has already indicated. And 130,000 calls seem to be a large amount of calls. I don't see how police needs to be involved in this process. Carlos O'Connell was on a billboard in Skid Row in 2014. There was a SMART team called Systems-Wide Mental Assessment Response Team in Skid Row. And he was on top of the billboard, and officers had been trying to get him down for about 3 hours. Eventually, they tased him and he fell to his death. Why? Because the SMART team was not called, or they weren't working that day. So instead of calling the SMART team, they called the SWAT team. So my fear is, and my pushback is this another SMART team response? And when are we going to find an adequate way to really deal with these issues? We need to reimagine public safety out of the paradigm that we're stuck in. We need to reimagine public safety.
Thank you, sir.
I want to add my voice to the previous comments made that I actually felt might have resonated with some of you. I heard at least one of the presenters reiterate how police should not be involved in these interventions and these interactions with people with mental health crises. And yet, the language, like every sentence had LAPD, had law enforcement. They just kept, so there's a real disconnect there. We know of so many times, countless times when family members and friends have called 911 because a loved one was having a mental health crisis, and those family members, the loved one ended up shot dead by LAPD. We know that's happened so many times. If you don't know the names, I can give them to you next week. Many, many. And it always comes to mind Daniel Perez, who in 2016 was 16 years old and killed by LAPD, who later said he was really trying to kill himself using the cops. There's many instances also where the cops have said that, that their use of force decision was just inevitable because somebody was actually trying to kill themselves. And we know that mental health professionals could have averted these tragedies. So I hope all of this reference to LAPD in these presentations, the one thing that really resonated and gave me hope was someone acknowledging that LAPD should never be involved in these interactions.
Thank you, Ms. George. Are there others? Okay, thank you. The goal here is to get the police to prevent police response to these mental health calls when it's not necessary. And so diversion is one way to do that if the call comes into the police. Is there a way to avoid even the call? So you started out by saying that these folks are basically calling the wrong number. Is there a way through marketing and PR, other strategies that we could get more people to call the right number so that people are calling the D.D. Hirsch or the mental health support line instead of calling 911 and potentially getting an unnecessary police response?
We do. We actually do community meetings. We've published, and it's on our department's forward-facing website, of 911 checklists. Basically talk about when to call and when not to call. What other numbers are available. The 1-800 access line for the county, NAMI's number is on there as well. Every community meeting we have, we hand them out. They're at every police station. It's on our public-facing website. So we constantly are trying to educate folks that what is the proper response for your loved one. And other than a 911 call. So we are definitely putting that out. We actually just published the 911 checklist in Korean. It just got approved this week. So we've got Spanish, English, and Korean now. And so we're trying to outreach to as many members of the community as we can to do that exactly, to educate on what is the most appropriate response for their loved one.
That's great. And I imagine it could be quite challenging to change that behavior and to get the word out through credible messengers so that people will call the right number. I know this has been done in one of the models we looked at a while back. I wonder if there's a way to assess the impact of the methods you described to get people to call the right number and to determine at some point whether it's working and if it needs additional resources and additional marketing strategies to prevent people from calling the police and instead call the appropriate community or mental health service.
Okay. We can look into that.
And if I may add to that, I think that is exactly the reason why the FCC recommended to a
Right.
3-digit number for the National Suicide Hotline.
Yeah.
Commissioner, if I
Are
may
there
add,
additional- yes,
I
sir.
think one of the areas that we can also certainly look at is going back a couple of years to see since we started this campaign and getting the message out and see if we've actually had a reduction in the amount of calls actually coming in that should be going to the 911 hotline. So that's certainly something that we can
Yeah,
look
that
at.
would be helpful. Other comments or questions, Commissioner? So I would like to see, I think, a couple report backs. The first would be in 4 months on the successful implementation of the suicide, what are you calling it? Suicide diversion?
Yes, ma'am.
What are you calling it? Okay, we know what we mean. And the second report back, I would like to understand the department's estimate of the cost savings of both of these programs to the department and identify whether and how those resources could be diverted or reinvested into community-based responses, as well as other potential sources of funding for the second program, the low acuity mental health calls diversion. And also, if you could include in that report the number of calls you believe would be eligible for that type of diversion, and how many you think you could successfully divert per van, or however you would, whatever unit you'd look at. Does anyone want to add anything to those two report backs? Could I see the second report back, how quickly, like 2 weeks? The one that just identifies the sources of funding and the cost?
Sources of funding, they're going to be I've just met with grant section, and so they're kind of in charge of when the grants are released throughout the year. And they don't know exactly which grants are going to be released when. I can try to get that, I think, 2 weeks. And I would have to talk to grant section about that, because that's where the money is going to be.
Okay, that and how we could potentially divert PD resources. Great, anything else? Okay, can I move that, even though I'm chairing the meeting? I move that, okay. Second? All in favor? Do we have to, all in favor? I moved it. Can I move it? Yeah.
Yeah.
Someone want to second it?
Yeah.
Okay. All in favor? It carries. Thank you very much. Thank you.
Thank you so much.
Thank you. All right, report of the Chief of Police.
Good morning, Commissioners. In terms of
State your name for the record, sir.
okay, good morning, Commissioners. I'm Assistant Chief Horace Frank, and I'm sitting in for Chief Moore. In terms of notable events, this past Friday, February 21st, at approximately 1:30 in the morning, we had an officer-involved shooting. Southeast Patrol officers who were on loan to 77th Division responded to a radio call of an unknown in nature. The female caller was requesting the police to the area of 78th Street in South Hoover. When the officers responded, they encountered a female who was seated between two parked vehicles. They tried to make contact with her. She was not fully engaging the officers, so the officers requested additional information from Communications Division. One of the officers attempted to assist the female to a standing position. She pulled away from the officer and produced a kitchen knife, approximately 6-inch blade. As the officers were backing away from the individual, she walked towards the officer with the knife, and an officer-involved shooting occurred. This suspect was struck by gunfire and transported by a rescue ambulance to Harbor UCLA Hospital where she was cared for her injuries, non-life-threatening injuries. Another incident that's notable, I'm sure many of the commissioners have heard recently in the news about the numerous threats that have been going out to Jewish community centers around the country. We know that we had one in Albany, New York, and about 18 others throughout other parts of the country. Just yesterday, we here in the city of Los Angeles actually had one in Los Angeles. The contents of that particular call, again, was threats to where the individuals emailing threats to members of the Jewish community centers, and this is pretty much similar to the others that we've seen occurring around the country. This incident is currently being investigated by the Federal Bureau of Investigation with assistance from our folks at Major Crimes Division. In terms of the Chief of Police, this past week attended several community events, and some of them that were noteworthy is the community meeting with Suits in Solidarity, which was an event that Chief Moore attended. I was there also, along with the Inspector General and Commissioners Bonner and Eileen Decker were also in attendance at that event. We also had the African American Forum, again this past week, that Commissioner Bonner attended with Chief Moore along with myself. And of course, we all had yesterday the Kobe Bryant Memorial, which went off without any issues within the city of Los Angeles. And these are just some of the events that the chief attended. From the standpoint of crime, year to date, we've got 27 homicides in the city compared to the same period last year when we had 39. This is a 44.4% increase. Total violent crimes, we actually do have about 150 less total violent crimes compared to the same period last year. Property crimes, again, we're about 1,446 less property crimes compared to the same period last year. This is about a 10% reduction. So overall, Part 1 crimes, we're down 0.9%. We're down year-to-date in Part 1 crimes throughout the city. Traffic remains certainly something that we're very concerned about throughout the city. And in terms of fatalities, year-to-date, we've actually got 23 traffic fatalities in the city compared to the same period last year of 29. And this is for the period ending February 15th, I'm sorry. This is a reduction from the same period last year, but we're certainly concerned about the pet fatalities that we've been seeing in the city. Many of these have ended up being hit and runs, which is very concerning to us. And I think the chief has alluded to this in the past, that many of these pet fatalities that we're seeing, it only becomes a crime when the individuals, the suspects in the vehicles, fail to stop and render aid. Because quite often, they're not the ones that are at fault, but then once they leave the scene, it becomes a problem. And just yesterday, we had a very tragic incident in Northeast where 2 individuals just past midnight, where a husband and wife were crossing the street when an individual in a dark-colored vehicle drove by at a high rate of speed and struck both of them, and again, failed to stop. And unfortunately, one of the victims, the wife, passed away as a result of her injury. So this is very concerning. So we're trying to follow up on some of the leads that we have at this time. In terms of personal strength, currently the department's sworn and municipal police deployment, we're at 10,004. For civilian personnel, we're currently deployed at 3,021. Our total reserve officers, we're at 386. And in terms of our cadet corps, we're at 1,724. And that concludes the chief's report. Unless you have any questions.
Thank you, sir. Questions from commissioners?
Thank you, sir.
Thank you so much. Public comment on the chief's report?
Yes, we have 4. Jonathan Foster, Audrey George,
Is the mic on? Somebody left a pen up here if you want it. The Jewish issue has a lot to do with the immigration. I don't remember that this kind of stuff was taking place 100 years ago, but if we have more immigrants that are PO'd at Jewish people and then we're bringing them into the United States of America, they go commit crime on Jewish anything, then it reflects on the United States of America incorrectly. That's not what the United States of America was like. So I think part of the problem might be that if Jewish people do something over there that totally ticks somebody off and then they immigrate to here, they might end up doing something to Jewish things. The Constitution preamble says to secure the blessings of liberty to ourselves and our posterity. It doesn't say we're securing the blessings of liberty to Israel over there, to their posterity. Does not say that. That's the problem. I don't hate Jewish people. I hate what they do. I hate that they are incurring the damage they incur. It'll get you sent to hell. Okay? It's a true thing. But I'm not also at the same time supposed to sit around knowing what the Constitution says and then watch all the money fly out the building, and then we're over here talking about there's more bad things happening to Jewish things. It seems absolutely stupid. I just can't. I don't understand how we can read the Constitution or even the Declaration of Independence about equality, but then somebody even from another country comes here and then acts out on Jewish people. This is not what America was. I don't agree with that. But I have a super hard time with where is all the money going that should have been going to ourselves and our posterity.
Thank you, Mr. Foster. Ms. George?
What I'd like to hear in the chief's report is occasionally a reference to officers no longer on your payroll because they murdered innocent, unarmed civilians. I know this is something we'll probably never hear, even when the police commission has said some things out of policy, like officers Robles and Lee. Even when we know, when the facts are so egregious, Well, and we'll never hear that these officers, like Eden Medina, who killed 2 people and is still on the streets. And we know one of the causes, one of the symptoms of the sick system is that LAPD's data-driven, evidence-based policing program, part of its larger architecture of surveillance, tells cops before they get on a scene, this is a dangerous criminal. He's in a place where only dangerous criminals are. We know who he is. The officer who killed Victor Valencia, who knew better, who was the sergeant and knew what a gun looked like, knew what use of force policies were, committed a criminal act because he didn't even try to de-escalate Victor Valencia, murdered him within less than 20 seconds after arriving on the scene. And that Sergeant Langsdale, I'm waiting to hear about the day when he is no longer an LAPD officer.
The final 3 speakers, Yvonne Michelle Autry, Hamid Khan, and Melina Abdullah.
Yes, through your SARs, your facial recognition, your predictive policing, hot spots. You have people giving hot shots, predictive policing. Right? I'm not a whore. I'm not a sex goddess for the Mexican, El Salvadoran, Guatemalan maintenance men who are hired by Isaac Shomoff, Israeli Jewish man, to target and break me down and every other black woman in the Alexandria Hotel, the Hayward Manor Hotel, for use and access for anyone that wants it, that needs it. I'm not it. Going back to slavery, the exploitation of black women. Technologically, you have reversed and you have devolved and returned to that system where single women like me who choose, as is my prerogative, to live alone without being incriminated or witch hunted. I'm not supposed to be the village whore, and I'm not. And I'm speaking on behalf of many black women that are in the street, that have been murdered, victims of the Grim Reaper, victims of the Strawberry murder, if not labeled mentally ill, okay, like Margaret Mitchell, who you said threatened one of the police officers, then they'd be labeled prostitutes to justify this extermination, not only of black women, anyone you put in a trash, or the sacrificial victim. The sacrifice. The mafia is working with synagogues of Satan. These are Jews in name only, but synagogues of Satan. I'm so sorry because one person's suffering is anyone's suffering, whether it is here in Skid Row in Palestine. Jewish people forget. You forget what happened in Germany. I've been to Germany. I speak, read, and write German. You forget what happened in Egypt. You forget, and now anyone that you perceive as a threat, black people, anyone you don't want to look at as a potential sacrifice, you throw in the trash. Well, that's karma repercussions for anyone. Even you are not untouchable. God forbid. Wake up call. All will bow before the throne of the living God.
Thank you. Hamid Khan.
I want to just lift up the level of incompetency that we're dealing with. On 5th of September, we submitted a detailed public records request on LAPD's architectural surveillance. And we didn't receive anything until we wrote a letter to the chief and a copy to the commissioners about 3 weeks ago on the 11th of February. Well, lo and behold, on the 12th, 7 documents show up in the portal. And then there's nothing. Nothing. And then yesterday, magically, 6 more documents show up, out of which 5 are repeat from the previous 7 that was sent to us. So now, this is 6 months since we submitted a public records request. And 3 weeks ago, Eileen Decker, I think, instructed Richard Tiefenk or Michael Moore to follow up. And then we get these documents, but they're repeat documents of the same documents that came to, I mean, like, so what are we dealing with? We've already won 2 public records lawsuits against the LAPD. One just last December on laser, and one previously on the suspicious activity reporting program. So if this is what you want us to do, we'll keep on filing lawsuits. But this is completely as incompetent as it gets, because, there was a big lawsuit that was settled with the Discovery Section, against the Discovery Section about 3 years ago, which with all this hoopla turned this into a portal and an electronic submission and all of that. So now when you even follow that, nothing happens. Complete silence. So I don't know who runs your Discovery Section and what's going on. I mean, the commission has to really get involved in this thing, because this is absolutely absurd. This is completely absurd that, and it's a waste of time. It's a waste of time, it's a waste of money, and it's a waste of something like somebody keeps on repeating the same shit all over again. So take care of that garbage.
Thank you. What is the update on this Public Records Act request response?
It's 194995.
Madam President, Mr. Khan, did you see a response letter in the portal last night? It was posted around 5 o'clock.
With some documents? It's a repeat of the same documents.
No, there's a letter, sir, about a 7-page letter. Did you see that last night in the portal? No. I have a copy. I'll give it to you after the meeting. All right, sir.
Thank you, sir. Melina Abdullah.
So before I get to the substance of the report, I want to get to the tone of the report. And again, my name is Melina Abdullah. I'm with Black Lives Matter. And this is a response to your report, Mr. Frank. So it would be nice if you would engage the public who's responding, but I guess you choose not to do that.
Why is she being ignored by the person acting as chief of police?
So this is, again, about the tone of it. So you all keep talking about police and community trust. I know you're not blind. You see what's happening. You see that when we just asked for the name of the person reporting, he refused to give it until you directed him to do so. This was an unnecessary asshole move. You don't have to be assholes to us. You don't have to. It was a reasonable request. It doesn't say your name on the placard. We want to know who's speaking. And so stop treating the community like this just because we're here to critique you, right? You need us to critique you. If you didn't have a badge and a gun, you would be just an ordinary black man that we would be standing up for. That's right. And so you need to have a little bit more respect for the community that you claim to serve. I want to speak to this question of hate crimes. It's really important that I'm a former commissioner with the County Human Relations Commission, and we used to do the hate crimes reports for the county. It's important that we address what's really called swastika vandalism. It's very important that we talk about rhetoric, but if you look at the numbers, the assaults on persons are really mostly assaults on black people. So as we start to talk about anti-Semitism, which needs to be talked about, we cannot stop talking about anti-blackness. So it's important that you do that. And then finally, I just want to lift up for everyone here, let the shooting on 78th remind us not to call the police on ourselves, because they are not our saviors. Our community is our savior. And we're thankful that the young woman survived the shooting, but she never should have been shot in the first place.
Thank you, Ms. Abdullah. So that concludes our public comment for the chief's report, and now general public comment.
The first speaker, Michelle Bisnoff, then followed by Jonathan Foster.
Good morning, Commissioners. My name is Michelle Bisnoff. I'm here today as the chair of the Brentwood Community Council over in West LAPD. I have 3 comments to make this morning, and I'm going to segregate them after hearing a few things from this morning. First of all, once again, on a personal note, I hear and see society's issues being dropped on the front door of the LAPD without the appropriate staff and budget from the County of Los Angeles. You are expected to do many things that you are not supposed to do, and I hope in this election year we can get them to provide a little bit more support, particularly around mental health. In regards to West LAPD, on behalf of the Brentwood community, many of our officers are becoming ill with staph infections. We'd love to expand the UV pilot program currently going on in downtown that can reduce their infection rate by allowing those officers to stand on those UV banks of light when they come back from their tours of duty around the neighborhood. We're really finding our officers getting very, very sick, and we'd like to see that program expanded in terms of the budget for next year. And finally, HOPE teams. We need HOPE teams as fixed units in each one of our PD areas. Right now, they're not fixed teams. Frankly, we're a little bit concerned that the grants committee here at the LAPD isn't being a little bit more aggressive in going after the Los Angeles Homeless Services Authority for funding to support the LAPD. The HOPE teams are there to provide services mostly, and what we've seen, particularly in the Palisades, is a much higher rate of acceptance of social services when there is also enforcement as part of that process. So I'm hoping as we move forward, we can combine both of those and perhaps work with the internal departments here, not against your internal union deals or anything with the Police Protective League, but kind of work together to fund reserve officers and also other officers who want to work overtime for HOPE teams. Thank you.
Thank you. Jonathan Foster.
Hi, I'm Jonathan Foster. We're missing 8 other black people up there. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. We need more black people up there. I'm homeless in my van, and my responsibility to people isn't the same as being appointed to the commission as an official or being elected or commissioned to kill. My responsibility to the public is not the same as yours. Here's Steve Soberoff Park. I just lost it. Steve Soberoff Park. It's got his name on it. He wants you to know his name. There's your name, but you forgot Rosario Mack's name. And I find it appalling that you want people to remember you after you're gone. That really sucks. The reason I scream is because I'm protecting you, Steve. This could also happen to any of us, where the police show up and you're doing this and boom, 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 you're dead. And did anybody notice that after President's Day, they came here, after President's Day, there was no commission meeting. But after Martin Luther King, they came here and had a meeting, okay? And when we were talking about homelessness in the past, how about Ms. Goldsmith, you sit down with anybody over here and start telling them all the things that have happened to your life and all the bad things, and tell them your social security number, your personal info. How about Steve? Steve, I'll assign you to somebody else, and then Steve, you start telling them your personal information, social security number, all the bad things happened in your life. And unfortunately, my BlackBerry is not working now. The madam was saying that she wanted everybody to hurry up and give that ethics report because we're behind. That's what the recording I would have had. But you didn't come here after President's Day, but you came here after Martin Luther King Jr.'s birthday. That's a bunch of you-know-what.
Thank you, Mr. Foster. Is there any remaining general public comment?
Yes, we have 4: Yvonne Michelle Autry, Gina Viola, Zach Sherwin, and Hamid Khan.
Yes, when I was assaulted in October by a man who I believe might have been hired by Isaac Shomoff or counterintelligence to harass me into the street, as many black women have already been forced into the street. They've disappeared, murdered, kidnapped, victims of abuse, misogynistic abuse. Those police officers were Guzman and Veracruz. The only agency that usually reports these murders of black women, the disappearance and kidnaps, femicide of women in general is at an all-time high. I know that the Mexican mafia is perpetrating. I speak, read, and write Spanish, and I can hear them when they call me calientita boca and then guia por vampiros, right? So what I'm saying is these officers, Guzman and Veracruz, arrested me when I was assaulted, and I had a 2-year paper trail against this man. Okay, I'm one of many women, but I'm vocal because I'm still alive. Again, I don't want to keep repeating this because I am not the deranged person here. He's a pedophile. The vampires, the cannibals, pedophiles, the oath takers are protecting him, many of whom are police officers, judges, supervisors, lawyers. And so I'm incriminated because I expose those that you protect in maintenance of your status quo principalities or the Illuminati that preside right now. So I'm telling you, God's day is coming. Okay, so this is what is happening here. We live to expose the brutality and these innocent people that have been sacrificed. That man who had been urinating and masturbating on my door, which is a sex spell, satanic ritual, should have been immediately incarcerated, especially when he threatened my life with a felony terrorist threat to throw me out the window. Guzman and Veracruz, I suppose you're going to commend them, but they did murder me. Thank God. There's a greater power than your corruption on this earth.
Thank you. Ms. Viola?
How bad are police at their job that a woman with a small kitchen knife has to go away shot? Right. I ask this over and over again, and I've come to the conclusion that it's not that they're bad at their jobs. They're doing exactly what they're being trained to do. Right. And they're doing exactly what this oversight body lets them continue to do. This woman called the police on herself, and she went away shot with a small kitchen knife. Some thinking to do. Why are members of what is supposed to be an oversight body for the police going out with the police to community events? How am I supposed to feel that there is any oversight of the LAPD at all? The chief of police sits with you, not before you. You are one body. You are the LAPD. There is no oversight. No oversight at all. ABC News did a story recently about how this commission votes unanimously, time after time, despite numerous public comments to the contrary. Did any of you see that? Well, I'm sure you did not. Well, it was telling to me that it's finally on the radar of this city that you are a rubber stamp board for the LAPD. It would be nice if you would do something else. Now I'm taking my own time to do a deep dive into each one of you personally to figure out why it is you even sit here and take our time. Because that's what you're doing. You're taking the community's time and making a mockery of it by going out on events and sitting alongside the LAPD and not being the oversight that you're supposed to be.
Mr. Sherman?
Even though the item that I'm mostly going to be speaking about is actually in section... Oh, thank you. I've never seen it before. I'll take it. All right. I'm going to talk about something in section 4, a closed session item. And specifically the law enforcement related injury of Juan Romero in April of 2019. And I want to start by talking about a couple moments in the language from the LAPD online press release that came out in November about the incident. It describes Romero as a, quote, man with a knife. Well, if you watch the video that's linked, the person who calls 911 about Romero clearly reports that it's a butter knife immediately on the call. So the fact that it's then just presented without the further descriptor of butter knife in the press release, I think heightens the situation. And I don't think it's accidental. The press release also says Romero refused to comply with the commands of the officers. Well, he was under the influence of narcotics and clearly suffering from some acute mental distress. So to characterize it as him refusing to comply with the officers, I think paints a misleading picture of what's happening there that is to the advantage of LAPD in an unfair way. There's misleading closed captioning in that video. The 911 caller very clearly says there's a guy with an outfit handling a butter knife, and the captioning that you put on says a guy having a fit and handling a butter knife. Or I'm sorry, not that you put on, that the LAPD put on. Once again, it contributes to a misunderstanding of the situation. And then I'm watching the video and it goes on to say the picture fades and a screen comes up and it says, during the process of taking Romero into custody, both officers' body-worn video cameras fell off. Both of their cameras fell off again. It evokes nothing so strongly as the murder of Albert Ramon Dorsey, and I couldn't believe it when I saw it. Unfortunately, I can believe it. I've got a couple more things to say and not that much time, not my full 5 hours. So I will just say, Acting Chief Frank, that was an embarrassing display to watch you refuse to make eye contact with a community member who was addressing you. It must have taken a conscious effort to keep your eyes averted when that was happening, and I hope you're embarrassed.
Hamid Khan?
Madam President, we have one card that was submitted just now, Pancake. Do you want to accept it?
Who was it?
Pancake.
So I'm looking at the email right now, Mr. T-Fank, and this is really pathetic. I mean, so 5 more documents? This is the trickle-down stuff that the LAPD, the games that they play, but I'll take a copy of that letter too. So this is what we are dealing with. So in essence, what they are forcing us to do is to really start thinking of filing a lawsuit because there's no other recourse. Like after 6 months, if we're going to get 6 documents out of 100 that we are asking and trying to follow a law that was created in 1968, and this is the kind of stuff that we get. But I want to go back to another email about the data-driven handbook, which apparently the email says that it's not going to come back to the commission for a vote. It's going to the committee because the city charter gives the jurisdiction for a handbook to the chief of the police. But here's the kicker, that you are accepting a handbook to be implemented, whereas on October 22nd, Eileen Decker talked about Pretpol and says that the commission asks the IG to do continuous oversight. We will continually review that program, and we specifically asked it to be reviewed for disparate impact. So now the last audit the IG did was on March 12th. They released that in 2019. It'll almost be a year coming up on March 12th. So what is the continual oversight of this program that Eileen Decker talked about, but yet at the same time, while there's nothing to look at that how the program has moved, since we've been demanding that that needs to be shut down too, yet the handbook is being allowed or adopted or is being implemented. I mean, don't you see the disconnect over here? That on one hand, you are claiming for a continual oversight. It's been a year, there's zero oversight, but yet this guidebook, this data-driven handbook is being implemented. So that's the complete dissonance, and that's the complete inherent contradiction that you all just put out there, and no wonder people just have no faith and no trust in this.
Pancake?
All power to the people. Brother Pancake, LA can't stop LAPD's fire. I had to be here today, coming up to 5 years since Brother Africa was killed. March the 1st. It didn't have to be. Brother Africa, Sumarov, he would come into Mother Space. I know he had issues right there. The deployment of the SMART team, Systemic Mental Assessment Response Team, could have been deployed. So this day, I'm coming here and say, can't kill Africa.
Can't kill Africa.
Can't kill Africa. I want to comment even on sensitivity training. I know earlier, Department of Mental Health, there are times, some officers, I peruse LA County and I listen to some of the conversation, whether it's detained civilian and LAPD. We can do better. You guys can do better. I would like to share one definition of accountability: to measure performance, actions, and conduct against a prescribed set of standards. I was born in LA. I did some work with former police officer Tom Bradley, former Mayor Tom Bradley. So I know LA, I know the hoods, I know the hot spots, and I know what's going on. I'm a father and a grandfather. I'm looking out for my daughter, the next generation coming up, And we got to be fair about this thing. Do you hear me, Police Commission? I'm not raising my voice, but I'm just speaking truth to power. You all are accountable. Just say it. I said it. I'm out. Pancake out.
Is there public comment on the closed session items?
No, Madam President, there is not.
All right, then we will recess to closed session. Thank you.
The Board of Police Commissioners will now recess into closed session to discuss items 4A1, 4A2, and 4A3 in accordance to Government Code 54957. Okay. The Police Commission has concluded its work in closed session. We are now back in open session. In closed session, item 4A1 was discussed and the chief's recommendations were unanimously adopted. Item 4A2, the chief's recommendations were unanimously adopted. And item 4A3, the chief's recommendations were unanimously adopted. We are now back to our agenda item.
Once again, the dream of a good life in Southern California has taken a major jolt.